Alrighty, good afternoon. This is Jonathan Albin. This is a special episode of Nikos RPG, and this is GM's Guide responding to the recent kerfuffle that seems to be going on in the YouTube space. Now, I'm a little guy. I've got 200 followers right now, 200 subscribers, and I greatly appreciate every one of you. And I hope that you will continue to like, follow, and subscribe. Hit all the buttons down below because that really helps to build the audience. But the question has been raised because there are several major players that were influencers, I guess you would call them, in the role play game Dungeon Master side, and they have been either completely stopping their videos or at least addressing the issue that it seems to be that the YouTube algorithm has basically cut them off. And I think that there are some reasons why this might be a trend, and I'm going to address them. And I hope it becomes a conversation. If you are in the role play games environment and either you agree with me or you disagree with me, let's have some conversation. So respond in the comments section concerning these topics. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the very nature of a tabletop role-play game. When you are looking in the world and you're looking for something entertaining to do, there are many things that are electronic, digital, instantaneous gratification, not a lot of difficulty or challenge or pressure placed on you as the participant, and yet tabletop roleplay games doesn't fit very neatly into that package. Instead, we are an analog entertainment format. Yes, we're arguably cruder than the usual because we use dice to determine outcomes instead of a random number generator on a computer someplace. We look at the discussion and the description of situations and take into account what the player's actions and desires are, regardless of what those possibilities are, unlike a video game or a MMO or whatever that defines what they can or cannot accomplish within that framework. Now, granted, they're way more compliant to what the players might want in modern settings than they were, say, even a decade ago, but they are not analog. And tabletop roleplay games as an analog entertainment form literally requires the participants, the consumers, to actually take in what's being presented, and that's problematic for a ad-driven, promotional-driven mechanism, and we're not what they are looking for in an audience. And I don't mean to say that there are intentional targeting being done or even that role-play gamers are a dying breed or whatever, but what I am saying is that we are a different style of entertainment, and we're not going to hit the mechanics of an algorithm in a affirmative fashion simply because our mechanisms don't meet with what they want from or what even the viewers necessarily are looking for, because we require some participation, at least at some level, from them. Furthermore, I think this has really been something that's been playing on me, is that storytellers, game masters, DMs are all self-sufficient creatures and creators. And what I mean by that is I want to help game masters have a better experience at the table. I want their game sessions to be more fun. But most game masters are pretty much confident, somewhat outgoing, at least forward thinking individuals, and they don't necessarily look for help. I know that in my case, if I look back at my own history, I did not come onto YouTube to look for how to be a better game master. So I imagine there are a bunch who haven't actually done so. And if you're one who's here to gather information about being a better game master, bless you, that you are my target audience. You are who I'm trying to reach, because I want to make the play experience for everyone a better thing, because ultimately I want everybody playing games, and the more of them that play role play games, the better in my estimation. So I better get my fiddle stick out here because otherwise I'll be pointing and triggering with my hands. So the idea here is that the DMs are self-sufficient and therefore there isn't as many of them looking for this information. Now, what that really means, I believe, is that we are in a situation where the viewers that are watching our materials maybe aren't staying for the full, duration of the episode because we're not what they're looking for. And unfortunately, that's the mechanism. Now, in my case, I'm building it partially as a legacy so that it's here for others in the future because I think there will be a need for role play direction and guidance in the future, and I'm building the legacy by putting the videos out there. But I also think that there are plenty of game masters who, if they put their mind to it, they would realize that they probably do need to be part of a conversation, and a format like YouTube is a great way to interact. So I hope to hear from some of you as well when we're talking about this stuff. Now, this is a big one and has everything to do with net value to the advertising organization or the engine that is driving YouTube. Historically, tabletop role-playing games are valueless because for decades people played role-play games without putting any revenue behind it. And I was a game master for decades, and yet I was making some money along the way by running tournaments and doing several different types of things. But generally speaking, most people who have any experience with tabletop role-play games have done so at the level of income netting to zero. And so even though the manufacturers of the property, Dungeons and Dragons or a name company here, Paizo Publishing or whatever, they generate their revenue by selling books, but that's not necessarily what the value of the online community is. And so therefore there's not there's a consumer basis. There are viewers that will come on and consume content, but they're not necessarily game masters looking for it. You'll see more of us that are ourselves storytellers and want to either promote our individual story, or we're looking for a means to get more information out about the properties that we're involved with, which does lead to sales. And I suppose if we were more aggressive on the sales aspect, perhaps they would be more amenable to us, because the big boys aren't going to stop producing material. They're just not driven by the dollars that the YouTube generates. So YouTube producers are depending upon that ad revenue and that viewership. And if we're not able to drive viewership because we're not targeting to the right audience, naturally the audience mechanism for YouTube is not going to favor us. So I can see why there would be a challenge with that. Now, when you create material such as I do, I kind of cross broad bases. I'm not only talking about how I can make your table more exciting and more fun, but I also talk about how to handle the challenges that we have in game. And those videos will hold value, I believe, over the long term. But when it comes to the algorithm, to the mechanism of YouTube, we have to find ways to make tabletop RPGs value full for the channels. And the irony is that there is more and more pressure being put on the shorter and shorter videos. And although they have expanded that up to like 3 minutes long, it still doesn't drive the viewership. Most people are doing the quick fix dopamine drop, and that's all they're looking for. And so when we talk about how tabletop games are going to be able to generate revenue through YouTube, we have to find ways to make the content what people want. One way I've tried to do that, and I've got a few episodes of it going on, but generally speaking, the concept of actively playing with the viewership audience, I suppose it depends on having a live stream audience, but even without that, even if you're looking at it with the concepts that I've utilized for Roleplay Roulette, I don't have near the feedback from that yet because it's so new. And while I do believe that in the long term we will find there will be a drive for that, and I think that's really where in the long term tabletop role play will become network role play, and we'll see that advance over time. Nonetheless, we have to realize that where we are right now, TTRPGs are not considered to be worth their effort because there's no turnaround in it, and we're not, especially when we're talking about the expertise of running stories. It's useful for those that are looking for it, but that's a much smaller, I believe, audience than we might have thought before, simply because storytellers and game masters are really super confident in their own abilities and are not really looking for assistance as much as you might think. And I've run into this myself in dealing with game masters who they admire the fact that I've been doing it for 50 years, but they don't necessarily see any reason to take tutelage from me, even though there, of course, arguably would be, dozens of reasons why you might want to pursue that angle. Now, when I came up with this header, I realized I'm going to probably get some knee-jerk and elbow reactions to everyone. When I say that RPGs are not socially diverse, what I'm referring to is that the RPG at its core is a 4 to 5 person engagement, generally speaking. Yes, there are game masters like myself that can run 16, 17, 20 players into a session and be perfectly able to do that and keep everybody happy and engaged. But that's a rare value. And because we're not necessarily grabbing out for the larger audiences, generally RPGs are much smaller. If you say we're a board game aficionado, sure, you could do a review channel where you're talking about the new games that are coming out because that is something that people are looking for. But if you were going to say run a channel on how to have a better game of Catan or a better session of XYZ, you run into the same boat, you run into the same challenge. And that we feel, because of the value of say a show like Critical Role that's come out that draws attention to a player base, yes, there are people that are voraciously looking for something else to draw themselves into in terms of a story. But even in the case of Critical Role, you have a much smaller, narrow audience than motion pictures because of the very format that they would have to watch. You'd have to find ways to chop and channel your show down to half an hour, 45 minutes, and then it's no different than watching a TV program or a movie. So the idea of drawing people into role play through shows like Critical Role, I think is not really useful to us as you might expect, because it doesn't give us an opportunity to reach that broader diversity. Even in a situation where you've got a large group of 10 to 12 players, if someone is watching that vicariously, they're going to be watching a lot of noise, generally speaking, because even in those larger groups, there's going to be player-to-player interactions that can't be on screen all the time, and that doesn't appeal to somebody who's watching. They'd much rather be able to consume the story, but storytellers don't necessarily sit and relate all of that. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I've been doing, as many of you may know, is I do a weekly update on all of my campaigns called the Nikos Nightly News on Tuesdays. And it does not have a massive following. It has the players who are in the story that are looking for Easter eggs will definitely jump on and watch one or two of the episodes. But even that isn't necessarily a week over week hit. I don't have the response from viewers. And I think even when you talk about the massive GMs, the ones who pull 20,000, 30,000 views for the video, and of course this is my conjecture, it may not be absolutely true, but my guess would be that people that go and watch that are saying, okay, that's a great game master, let me see what it's like. And even those that are subscribed members don't necessarily watch every episode because there is not a draw for what I as a game master would want from that episode. I might be wrong there. So I would love to have a conversation about that as well, because I may find myself completely outnumbered on that one. And this is another of those issues. See, where's my camera? Okay, looking over here. The audience, that is, those individuals who are on YouTube to gather information about tabletop role play games, is relatively small. And that, you can just empirically see this when you walk into any community. If you got everybody's attention to say, ladies and gentlemen, how many people in here are role players, mathematically it's going to come out to less than a statistically significant number. And therefore the number of people that would watch it or would want to be part and collect that information is much smaller. Now, even in this case, I'm doing a show about role-play games. I'm pretty sure that people that click on it will watch for 2 minutes and then be done with it, because this is not a format that people definitely would be pursuing to find out this information, because they've already got their assumptions, they've already got their perceptions in line, and the actual audience that are tabletop role players that actually look at content is, I would say, much smaller than you might think. I know that in the case of Critical Role, for example, I have dozens of friends who say they've seen Critical Role, but I don't know any of them that would say that they've watched entire series. I've got one or two, but generally speaking, it's not drawing the same audience, and therefore even though the numbers will be some smaller subset of the overall, there's no way to know that those individuals are part of your audience. And I think that relatively tiny number is really one of the engine mechanisms for YouTube that makes it so that it's not really an economic boon to the overall audience of YouTube, because their job is to get people watching videos, and most of us are portraying information that we want to help others, and we hope people will watch them, but it's awfully hard to make that make sense in terms of ongoing involvement by the platform itself. Another element of this that I think is really telling is that a traditional roleplay game, such as Dungeons and Dragons, or even bigger ones like Traveller, or I say bigger as far as more expansive in terms of how much time it takes to build, the learning curve for even comprehending what the H is going on in a roleplay game is pretty high. And even if you break it down to bite-sized morsels and then kind of force feed it through a process like Critical Role or other established game group viewing shows, the amount of information that's needed to front load in order to get that appeal audience is actually one of the challenges, is that it takes too much to build your audience, because they require too much work from the viewer to understand what's going on. That sharp learning curve is really to blame for that. Now, in the case of Nikos RPG, I try to reverse that when you've only got a 5-minute play time, a 5-minute learning curve, and you get people into the action right away. That's appealing, but again, when you're trying to get the word out, when you're shouting in the thunderstorm and you're less than a thimbleful, you're not going to get the imprint. And so a show like this, or even my other episodes that are more specifically about roleplay, don't necessarily have the bigger audience. And I guess the reason why I'm doing this video in particular is I just wanted to make people aware that it's not necessarily for the revenue that we do this per se. I'm obviously trying to build awareness about my brand, but I'm not doing it as a specific marketing strategy. Instead, I'm just throwing in the stuff that's about my property along the way as we talk about the larger scale things of tabletop roleplay games. And again, the fact that it takes so long to learn about role play games is a problem for expanding the role playing audience. And now this one, here's another point where we might get into a debate, and I'd love to communicate about it. The RPG audience is accidentally elitist, and what I mean by that is that when you take the time and you've climbed that sharp learning curve, when you finally crest it and you finally understand the conversation that's going on between the various game masters and the various world builders and the various character players, they become incidentally or accidentally elitist because they now have a vocabulary and terminology that doesn't fit with the general public. So when you have to explain why you are now speaking in the meta during a game session, or you've got to take some time and explain why these dice rolls are necessary, you actually build a mechanism that alienates you from the very audience you're trying to achieve. And so the more veteran you become, the longer you've been in the hobby, the more information you have that makes your conversation less acceptable, less palatable, and so therefore makes it difficult for players, individuals, to watch what's going on because they feel that process has locked them out of it. And so it's really important that we as members of the games community reach out to those that are not in a way that gives them a faster track to understanding what's going on and therefore preventing this issue of elitism. Alrighty, so this is where I'm going? This is where I'm going. So the question becomes, how can we reverse these trends? How can we cause the audience mechanism of YouTube to accept and recognize what we're doing as something holding a value? The first thing is we have to show to ourselves that we hold our own properties and value. And one of the ways is to support your local storyteller, game master professionally. In other words, if they've put 6 months, 2 years, 50 years into a game session, there's some into game type, there's something to it for them, and therefore there is perhaps an improved value of outcome. Now, if you haven't sat down at my table compared to the other tables that are out there, there's no way you could know that. And even in those cases where you've watched some of my older videos where I was running live sessions, the amount of time consumption that you would have to invest to see that value is problematic. But if you have a games group that is near you and they're asking for player support through through their Patreon account or through watching their videos or whatever, you can support them and help them by doing that, and thereby drive up the value of our segment of the hobby. Now, again, I know that I'm whistling in a hurricane, so I don't expect this will be the video that drives my channel. But on the other hand, if we get the opportunity to actually talk about it, I'd love to talk about ways we can reverse these trends. We can actually start to present material that is useful to perhaps reduce our ego and take in videos that others have produced and gather information from what they are doing, and if there is something of value, support and promote it. But it really comes down to changing the mindset about what the value of that entertainment is. We're so used to being able to get the instantaneous outcome and the quick response through, a 2-minute short, that we're not really considering the potential value of something we might learn in a longer form of video. Additional things we need to do is find ways to communicate more directly. One of the ways that I'm going to be doing so in the near future is that I'm working now with more than one game store, and so I'm going to be working to get myself into more places and running more games to show their value. And if I'm not driving revenue by running professional games, which I have been doing, if that's not the solution, then I'm going to be looking for something else. As they say, you keep doing the same thing and getting the same result. Well, it's always what my dad. It's like my dad used to say, and my granddad too, that if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you've always got. And we aren't going to change the world overnight, even though the arrival of the internet, the arrival of artificial intelligence is giving us more opportunities and more options, and arguably making it less of a challenge to think of paying, because we already pay for so many other hobbies and things that we enjoy. It's not too far of a stretch to see that the RPG community can become more profitable, but in order to do that, we have to change the hearts and minds of those participants that are players. And I think that may be at its core one of the reasons why D&D 2024 is such a problem, is because they have decided to reach for a different audience, because the old audience has become calcified, has become routine, and does not spend the money that they're looking to gather, and so therefore looking for some other people to put money into that till. And so we have to therefore acknowledge and recognize that we are at fault, at least to some extent, on undermining the value of what we do. And as a game master with 50 years behind my shield, it really does demonstrate to me that perhaps we have let the horses run out of the barn way earlier, and really have a hard time now trying to close the gate and keep all those horses in. So we will have to see. Well, I only want to do a short little burst, and I'm sure I've talked way too long. So thank you again for being with me. I will see you in the next show. We do normally record Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. and 11 p.m. Pacific time. Hope to see you then.